What happens when the rules change faster than those people who are enforcing them can keep up? As a retired lieutenant general, I've seen the changes, the impacts that leadership, executive orders, strained alliances can have on the very fabric of our homeland defense. In this session, we'll explore the key forces shaping U.S. security posture. We'll also talk about risks and opportunity that comes with that. Let's get started. We're going to have a discussion today about geopolitical factors around the world, but we'd like to start here with the homeland. I hope this will be the first of what should become a series of discussions to talk about how geopolitics is affecting not just foreign policy, but also domestic policy and certainly the markets that we're involved in and invested in. So there should be a slide that you're viewing right now. I will use that today as a way to guide our discussion. It will not by any means be restricted to those topics. So as we get to the portion for question and answers, we can take the discussion anywhere you like. But I think foundationally, I'd like to kind of lay out how we approach things in the homeland with regards to defense. Now, certainly the homeland is broader than just the defense sector, but we are very much focused on some of the things that are involved in our defense sector ETF. And those are going to be driving certain aspects of the market based on policy that's being proposed by the current administration that will impact industry and the broader financial markets around the world. So let's dive into that a little bit. The first thing that I'd like to kind of lay out for everyone as a set level piece is how we derive the focus of not just defense, but the entire United States government underneath the presidency. So currently we're operating under the national security strategy that was signed into law was signed by President Biden in 2022. The Trump administration is currently working on their national security strategy. It will generally take 6 months or so from an election before that's ready. And I would expect to see the first offerings of the Trump NSS sometime in the late summer. So we'll be watching carefully to see what that national security strategy will direct all government agencies to focus on in the execution of their tasks as appropriated with the funds they get from Congress. Underlying and just below that national security strategy, particularly for the largest portion of the discretionary budget, is the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense will put out a national defense strategy that will nest very closely with the national security strategy. That national defense strategy will further be distilled into a national military strategy. The Secretary of Defense will sign the national defense strategy, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will be responsible for signing the national military strategy. And from there, each of the service departments will get their guidance from the secretary and the chairman on where they need to focus resources and priorities to move out to achieve the goals of our national security strategy. And there will be significant numbers of downstream documents, plans, operational plans, contingency plans that flow from that national defense strategy. But as we take a look at the homeland in general, and if you refer to the slide, you can see that I've divided it up into certain areas that I'd like to focus our topic of discussion on today. The first is the major influencing strategies or factors. I don't think we've seen, frankly, maybe not even in my adult lifetime, such a significant shift and such an aggressive shift, if you will, in a presidential administration as we saw during the inauguration of President Trump in January. Certainly that has driven a lot of what's going on. Influencing that is what we would call the MAGA aspect of the Republican Party that President Trump ran on, campaigned on, and believes is a mandate from the people that elected him. That's the Make America Great Again party platform. And what it quintessentially says is we've been, since really Woodrow Wilson, relatively liberal internationalists in our approach. A liberal internationalist foreign policy approach means basically that you believe the free market economy should thrive. People should have all of the freedoms that are guaranteed in our Constitution, freedom of speech, freedom from religion, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, and that we will support those countries that have similar types of governments to our own. That's really kind of how we approach it. So for those who are on the outliers, communist nations, some of the very extreme authoritarian nations like North Korea, those would be people that would be on the outside of a liberal internationalist approach. I would say that the Trump administration has pulled that back. I would not call what we're doing isolationist at this point, but certainly much more focused on what U.S. interests are, as opposed to what may be in the global interest. And I like to remind people all the time that the number one rule of foreign policy is that each nation will do first what is in its own best interest. So something to remember as you think about why decisions are being made in Europe or Asia or other places when we're trying to coax allies and partners to do things the way we'd like them to do, and they move in a different direction. It's because they may value our partnership and our friendship, but they're going to do what's in their own best interest. And the United States is moving in that direction under the Trump administration, which is something a little new for us. Furthering that has been this deluge, frankly, of executive orders that have come out throughout the Trump administration. Some of those are to answer some of the particular campaign promises that President Trump has made. And you can probably think of the ones that do that with regards to security on the southwest border and immigration and some of the other very hot topics. But in the defense lanes, we've been doing that as well. We've seen some pretty aggressive executive orders that deal with the federal acquisition regulations, and in more specific, the defense federal acquisition regulations, which are the rules that are in law and codified by Congress that describe for us how we go about building material, acquiring contracts, and fielding new weapon systems. This is of particular interest within the defense sector because these are the rules that everyone has used to govern the bidding and contracting process for the last 4 or 5 decades. And so as we see some pretty radical changes being proposed in executive orders, they still have to make changes to the law to make it work. We are seeing that there may be opportunities in the defense sector for growth in areas where we've not seen growth, and for some people who tend to be cut out by larger industry partners or OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. It may open up those markets to smaller startups or medium-sized businesses, and that creates a much more competitive environment in the defense market. So the EOs, the executive orders, are having a significant impact there. I'll talk a little bit about the cabinet when we get down and start talking about leadership changes, but certainly the way that President Trump has built his cabinet, the people that he's brought in that are like-minded to him with regards to his approach, have a significant amount of impact on U.S. domestic and foreign policy. Chief among those would be the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and then certainly the Secretary of the Treasury as we look at some pretty significant shifts in the economic landscape out there. Now, what are the impacts and expectations based on that? Well, we've already seen significant judicial challenges. And right now, if you were to open the paper or go to the website and take a look at what's going on with the administration right now, you'd see multiple challenges to some of these executive orders and some of these things that President Trump and his administration has advocated for, particularly with regards to how it may affect funding. And we're seeing this with colleges and universities right now, how it may affect due process. And we're seeing this in the immigration discussion right now, and also how it may affect the federal workforce. And we're seeing a pretty significant reduction in some of the federal workforce because the Trump administration believes that it has grown a little bit bigger than it needs to be. And so they are making some pretty aggressive swings at reducing that bureaucracy with 2 goals in mind: one, to make it more efficient, and number 2, to reduce the amount of expenditures that we have on that federal bureaucracy. You can expect those judicial challenges to continue. And then lying outside of that, as you can see from the chart, is this Department of Government Efficiency, where we've seen business leaders such as Elon Musk exert themselves to say, hey, look, if we were going to run the United States government like a business, these are the changes we would make. This is where we see money going. This is where we see money being misused, not necessarily misappropriated, but certainly in their opinion, misused. And this is what we would do to tighten that up and make the government more efficient and to get more out of the taxpayers' dollars. That's their approach. And as I think everyone here can acknowledge, that approach has been met with some bipolarity, depending on what your position is politically. So those things right there are kind of the major influencing factors and impacts that we see at the onset. We move back to the left side of the chart. Immigration of the southwest border has been a mainstay of the Trump administration. President Trump ran on this. Certainly, it was very important to him, and frankly, it seemed to be very important to the electorate based on the results of the election. He has focused on homeland defense in a way that really no one else has. Heretofore, I will tell you that our strategic policies had always illuminated, well, at least in the last 10 to 15 years, had eliminated homeland defense as the number one priority. Unfortunately, we never put many resources behind that. And again, one of the rules of leadership is you can tell where leaders focused by where they're putting their resources. Even though we talked a lot about homeland defense, we didn't put many resources behind it, particularly on the Department of Defense side. Now what we see is with the immigration and southwest border discussion that's going on and controlling our borders more carefully, lots and lots of emphasis and resources being pushed towards that particular challenge with regards to the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. And we are waiting to see what the reconciliation bill that's before Congress will bring. We believe there's about $150 billion in defense spending that's there. Some of that, much of that possibly, is going to be focused on the immigration question and in a more broader terms, border security. So we are still waiting to see what will happen with that. But that creates authorities confusion for us. The United States military is governed under United States Code Title 10, which very narrowly prescribes the types of things that uniformed military members can be involved in, particularly when they're under federal orders, like our active duty forces or our National Guard or Reserve orders once they've been mobilized. So Title 10 tells us that our mandate in the Department of Defense, and I say that as a former Department of Defense employee, is almost exclusively outside the continental United States, the totality of the United States, based on the Constitution and based on the fact that Posse Comitatus tells it that we cannot conduct law enforcement functions within the confines of the United States unless there are extreme circumstances. And that's where things get a little bit shaky with regards to authorities. I believe the Trump administration sees that with a much broader aperture than administrations beforehand. And I do believe that President Trump is looking to ways to leverage the Department of Defense's strength from a manpower standpoint to support the Department of Homeland Security as they tackle this very real and very challenging situation with security of U.S. borders. And that's not just here in the continental United States. That also deals with Hawaii, it deals with Alaska, and it deals with our territories in the Pacific and in the Caribbean. So a very, very broad approach to that. But those authorities are being conflated right now. It's creating confusion with policymakers. It's challenging our members of Congress to try to distill just what we can allow the Department of Defense to do in support of the Department of Homeland Security. And do we want to put the Department of Defense in the lead in any of these areas that have to do with securing the homeland actively? I will tell you that in most cases, when we are conducting, as the Department of Defense, defense support to civil authorities, which is a mission that we do routinely. You see it all the time with things like wildfires and hurricanes and COVID and Operation Allies Welcome, where we help find homes for Afghans. We do that as a military with a lead federal agency giving us direction. So the Department of Defense is almost never in the lead within the U.S. homeland conducting missions there. It's almost exclusively the Department of Homeland Security, and if not the Department of Homeland Security, some other federal agency. So that is creating some challenges and some confusion with regards to the authorities that we are seeking in the homeland right now. Let's walk back over and talk a little bit about how leadership changes are defining new roles for us. And I think, again, as you bring a new administration in, certainly all of the political appointees are going to change. It's very rare that you see a powerful political appointee stay in position with a new president coming on board. One of the rare exceptions would be Robert Gates staying on as the defense secretary when President Bush left and President Obama took over. That was almost unheard of, but President Obama wanted consistency and continuity in that role based on our commitments overseas, fighting 2 wars at the time. So he trusted Secretary Gates to continue to do that mission. Certainly, that's not been the case as we've seen the first Trump administration come in, the Biden administration, and now the second Trump administration come in. It's been a wholesale swap of people in the cabinet positions and the political appointees, in many cases down to a much lower level than we have seen in years past. So that's creating some challenges. The other part of that is while most people would acknowledge that the qualifications of cabinet members is more important than their alignment with the political candidate. It would seem that in the Trump administration, that's not necessarily been the case. So we've seen a very young and relatively inexperienced Secretary of Defense take over with Secretary Hegseth, certainly a capable leader, but someone with no background in the Department of Defense. He was a soldier, did deploy to combat, understands intuitively those aspects of the defense role, but has never been an insider in the Pentagon, has never worked on any of the Pentagon staffs. And so a very, very steep learning curve for Secretary Hegseth and his team. And I think we've seen some of that with regards to a couple of the highlighted areas like the Signal episode where information was being shared, not classified information to the best of my knowledge, but certainly sensitive information being shared through a chat app that is encrypted but not secure. That certainly was something that was looked at critically by some. And because of that, I think people were calling into question some of the qualifications of members of that department. However, the president gets to choose his team, and we've seen him bring in people who certainly were having some challenges with confirmation, but they've been confirmed. And so you have to adapt to the team that you get. You have to adapt to the types of guidance that they're giving those teams. And right now, we've seen a pretty significant shift with the Hegseth department in going after efficiency, valuing war fighting and lethality above all else in the department. And we've seen some pretty significant orders come out of the department over the last, frankly, several weeks, one of which is going to significantly transform the United States Army to include reducing the number of general officers in the force, reducing the number of Army staff personnel at the Pentagon, combining some commands so that there's more efficiency with those commands, and really kind of rescoping the priorities of what the Army is going to do. The Army is only the first of the services that's been touched by this type of directive. I would expect in the coming weeks and months, you'll see similar guidance given to the Department of the Navy and the Department of the Air Force. The Department of the Air Force is the executive agency for Space Force, and the Department of the Navy is the executive agency for the Marine Corps. So that will encompass all of our U.S. Service personnel, and we will very likely see changes. What will those mean to us? It's hard to tell. I can tell you that the Hegseth Department put out very early on a list of priorities, many of which are tied to weapon systems, submarines, shipbuilding, homeland defense and border security, and other areas, AI, and cyber type capability, space type capability, things that will give us a comparative advantage against our principal adversaries or our competitors that are out there right now. And chief among those, frankly, is the People's Republic of China. So everything that we do right now is focused on making sure that we can sustain our superiority against the Chinese in all areas. So those leadership changes have an impact on what we're doing from a domestic policy standpoint, certainly, but also foreign policy standpoint, and particularly in our defense sector. This is creating also synchronization challenges. What we've seen is a desire for this administration to go very, very fast. And frankly, big bureaucracies don't like that. So these big bureaucracies are having to adjust to the speed at which President Trump is directing change, and subsequently the departments underneath the executive branch directing change as well, from the Department of State to certainly the Department of Defense to the Department of Homeland Security. Now the government's got to find a way to synchronize those changes and meet the president's intent as they look to execute these initiatives and address some of the challenges that we find. Certainly, tariffs and alliances have been big in the news of late. We know that what we do with regards to economic policy is heavily influenced by the tariffs. We know that the Trump administration focused specifically on China, but also others, to include partners and allies, with some of the tariff talks, and we've abated the implementation of those for 90 days now. But certainly, President Trump feels that the Chinese have taken advantage of us, and he's correct. For a number of years, we've seen China steal technology from U.S. contractors and U.S. Think tanks and research institutes and turn that into capability on the Chinese side. They have slowed the exploration path for advancing their technology because they've been able to steal the blueprints, frankly, for systems and capability that were discovered and innovated from us and our allies. That will continue to be a problem until we shut that down. And so the tariffs obviously going to have an impact on some of that. And certainly the Chinese have pushed back and fought back in that space, and we'll see how long that persists. But we're also seeing some challenges with or a different viewpoint on our alliances across the world. I think the Trump administration has been very clear in that they see alliances as something that needs to be a little more fair and equitable. NATO is probably our chief alliance and one of our oldest. And I don't believe that the current administration feels like Europe has done their fair share with regards to contributing to the defense situation in NATO. And if you were to put the cards on the table and take a look at the numbers, that's absolutely correct. The NATO commitment by all member nations, of 38 member nations in NATO, is to provide at least 2% of your GDP towards defense. And more than half the nations in NATO have not done that. And so I think what we're seeing is an insistence by the current administration that those who have not been stepping up should step up. Some of those are pretty big partners like Germany. And there are others that are newer members of NATO that are doing more than their fair share, like Poland. So we'll continue to watch how that goes. And certainly that impacts everything that's going on right now, particularly in Ukraine, as Russia continues their very vicious battle against Ukraine, and how NATO is going to continue to contribute, and how the United States will contribute as a chief partner, the primary partner of NATO, how that role will adapt over time. And we can talk about that a little bit if there are questions later. Homeland defense is number one. So as I stated before, all of our strategic documents make it the number one objective of everything that we're doing. We have to defend the homeland, defend our way of life, to make the American people feel secure, to make sure that business and industry thrives, and to make sure that we can continue to be an example for the world of what we believe democracy should look like. We're going to do some pretty interesting things, I think, with Homeland Defense. Most people have heard about the Trump administration's aspirations about having a Golden Dome project, very similar to what the Israelis have with regards to Iron Dome in Israel. The challenge there is that the distances, the geography is so much more vast in the United States that it's hard to pick up the template of what Iron Dome is and lay it down neatly over the United States. So we've got defense partners that are already working very hard at that task. And we're going to see continued evolution in the defense sector for that. And we're going to see large contractors, medium contractors, and startups get involved as defense partners in this Golden Dome approach as we do things. So a lot to look for there. And I think it's going to be a very interesting time to try to work together with not just a kinetic approach to defending our homeland, but how can we synthesize space-based capability, accentuate AI to help us understand and sense and make sense out of things that we are observing, and then how do we bring all that together and synthesize that into a solution that allows us to protect ourselves here in the U.S. homeland. And so that really speaks to these increased homeland defense opportunities that we're going to see. Some of those are going to be frankly tied to border security. So we're going to see some of our defense partners and people in the defense sector that are going to be supporting that with sensor technology, certainly with life support technology as they set up different types of life support facilities and holding facilities where we may put people that have been deemed to be here illegally and hold them waiting for disposition. It's certainly going to create issues with logistics and sustainment of those types of functions. And we're going to see a continued increase in those sectors of defense that provide that type of thing. Similarly, we talked about Golden Dome, we talked about missile technology, we talked about interceptors. We're going to see sensor technology become more and more important. All of this enabled by AI, which is going to allow us to parse through data much quicker and come to conclusions much faster from a decision-making standpoint, and hopefully give us an opportunity to spend less effort and less resources as we seek our comparative advantage against our adversaries. So with that, I'd like to stop for a minute to see what questions we might get from the group and open the aperture a little bit on things that are going on here in the homeland. When we do this again next time, we'll look at a different part of the world and talk about some of the different aspects of defense that are concerned there. I think Space Force is involved in lots of different initiatives right now. I mean, so they obviously are closely aligned with NASA. They're closely aligned with Elon Musk's company. They're closely aligned with others who are kind of reaching for the star. Anything that has to do with propulsion, telemetry, the sensor packages, communication packages. They're working across a broad spectrum of the industry on that, because even though they don't own platforms specifically, they may own payload platforms, right? Communications and or positioning technology or things that are tied to our nuclear command and control. Space Force isn't responsible for building and launching rockets. We're working with NASA and other private contractors to do those types of things, and it's taken us years to do it. There's certainly the industry in Huntsville, Alabama, is exploding right now. I think we're going to see the move to Huntsville that was approved by the last administration. I believe that Colorado Springs has kind of lost their last appeal to keep Space Force in Colorado. So all of these things are going to play out over the next 6 to 12 months, and we'll see more and more, I think, specific discussion points about the types of things that we expect from Space Force. Space and space warfare is, by its very nature, very compartmented. So we don't talk a lot in open source about capabilities we're putting in space. I think everyone intuitively understands we're doing global positioning, we're doing communications, we're doing nuclear command and control, we're doing sensing and imagery and all types of observing from space. But beyond that, we guard very closely some of the programs that we're putting up in space, because the competition there is significant, and the Chinese are getting better and better, as are the Russians at their capability. And so we want to really kind of obfuscate as much of what we're doing from them as possible. That's a great question. I think it was just this weekend we saw President Sheinbaum kind of demur when President Trump had offered forces and offered military capability to help combat the cartels. The difference that I draw between the cartels, when you think about it in terms of an active war or active warfare, certainly I think our president has framed it that way because he sees it as an assault on the American people. But it's purely for the cartels. It's purely a money thing, right? It's criminal activity. For them, it's all about making money and really nothing more. Some of it's about territoriality and pride and that type of thing, but for them, it's about making money. So whether that's trafficking humans, trafficking guns, trafficking drugs, everything that they're doing is about making money. So they don't have any aspirations to take over, the Southwest desert of the United States. They just want to make money. However, we know that in doing so, they are violating laws and norms that really put Americans at risk on a daily basis. So much so that the authorities, particularly in Mexico, have a very hard time constraining that activity. Much of the Mexican local law enforcement authorities are frankly under the influence of the cartels. At the federal level, they're in pretty good shape. Their National Guard and Sedena and Samar, which is the Army and Maritime Forces, respectively, are kind of above that fray with regards to the corruption. But it very, very difficult for them to continue to fight the cartels because they're so ingrained in the society down there. So it would be hard to come up with a kinetic solution, to offer up drones with bombs or Hellfire missiles on them to take out cartel safe houses or cartel equipment. They've got some pretty advanced military grade equipment that makes them very formidable in a fight. So I think that's really not much of a panacea for the problem. And I think the way to do this is got to be through better governance in Mexico. And I would hope that the new president's looking at that. And frankly, a little bit more of a focus on it. My position on drugs has always been kind of simple. It's a demand problem, not a supply problem. When the demand goes away, it doesn't matter about supply. So we own some of this in my mind. But there are other parts of illicit activity that are going on with regards to the movement of illicit weapons. Human trafficking is rampant, and then certainly the lethal effects of fentanyl in particular creates a pretty significant risk for us. So I think we will continue to keep the door open, particularly to Mexico, but to others as well, to provide capability if they are willing to use that in a very focused manner against the cartels. And I think really we've got to do more with policy and law to focus on that, to make penalties stricter. And we probably need to do that for people who are here in the United States that are consumers and distributors of those illicit narcotics. Yeah, so thanks to everybody so much for tuning in, and look forward to another update soon. We can talk about all of the things that are influencing our approaches to the markets, and you can count on defense continuing to be one, as President Trump has promised a $1 trillion defense budget here in the United States. We're seeing others across Europe and Asia also step up with more investments in defense. So stay tuned. It's going to be an interesting ride over the next 6 to 12 months.